everybody. How are you out there in the dark? How you like the weather? Well, I tell you, I grew up where 106 was just regular in the summertime. But boy, our humidity was not very much out there. We chopped cotton. I'd play baseball games, and it was just great. And I can't hardly take this. This is kind of bad. But we've got a very special thing to recognize tonight. You guys stand up over there. You two. 43 years. 53. I'm sorry, I knew that. 53 years. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. I'm sure some of you wonder why I'm walking kind of the way I am. I've been dealing with pains down here, and so on next Tuesday, they're doing an epidural on me and trying to cut out some of this pain and this stuff working down here. So put that in your prayers, and I'm praying that they'll get this done. It's been very, very hard to keep going. I sometimes find it almost ready to fall down because of it. So put that on your prayer list. Well, we've got some new good songs to sing, so let's go with Leader.
All right. And hey, this first song's got I Lay Covered in the Snow. I hope that helps out some. You'll know it when you get to it. It's going to cool you right off. Like a sea leaving the flame, when the sun's first golden rain, marks the breaking of the day. I am turning to light. I am turning to light. I am reaching for the sun. I am turning to the night. In the battle now is won. There's a new sword in my heart. There's a new day on cry. I'm turning to light. Not so very long ago. Here it comes. I lay covered in the snow. There's no sign of spring inside. I'm turning to light. I am turning to light. I am reaching for the sun. I am turning to light. And the battle now is won. There's a new song in my heart. There's a new day on the cry. I'm turning to light. Like a robin in the spring, when the dew is listening, I will raise my voice and sing. I am turning to the light. I am turning to the light. I am reaching for the sun. I am turning to the light. And the battle now is won. There's a new song in my heart. There's a new day on cry. I'm turning to the light. I'm turning to the light. Did that help some?
Yes.
Just the word snow ought to help you out. So here we go. This old, I borrowed the melody and I borrowed the words from the chorus to an old song written in 1887, and you all know it. So I think this will be an easy one to follow along with, but I tailored it to our Cowboy church on Tuesday night. So here we go. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, Cowboy church on Tuesday night. Oh, what friends we have in trust in Jesus. And Sherry's going to kick this off for us on the piano. So sweet to trust in Jesus and to take Him at His word. Just to rest upon His promise and to know the sake of the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him. We're going to do a Willie Nelson song. You never believe it unless you already know this. Willie wrote this in 1957. It's got great words. It's been recorded hundreds, if not thousands of times. And we're going to do it. It's Family Bible. There's a family Bible on the table. Its pages are torn and hard to read. The family Bible on the table will ever be my key to memory. At the end of the day, when work was over,
With your permission, I'm going to remain seated. I can't stand up with this. That's why we're doing the workup on it coming up. So I'm going to sit here, and it's kind of strange. I can't really see your faces out there, so I don't know if you're sleeping or not. But if you see somebody sleeping, reach over and kind of give them just a little. I would like to just think that everybody is just wide awake and listening. I really enjoyed working on these sermons, the series that I am doing right at the present. Biblical Solutions to Basic Problems is the title of the whole series that I'm doing. And tonight we're going to take a look at a subject that is very much a part of all of our lives, yet one that is so often not dealt with as it ought to be dealt with. It's the matter of anger and resentment, unhandled anger and unbridled resentment. Statistics, I really like to pay attention to statistics. So now we're wondering how straight they are, but statistics over the years has said that 60% of all murders are committed by angry members of the family. The medical profession has identified more than 50 diseases, and they say are directly related in one way or another to unhandled, anger, and it affects all that we're doing. Anger can get in and get out, and develop resentment, unbridled resentment. And so as we take a look at this, it affects us spiritually and physically. That's the way we see it addressed in the Bible. Listen to the words of the book of Ephesians, where Paul writes in verses 26 and 28, "If you are angry, do not let it lead you into sin. Do not let the sunset find you still nursing it. Leave no loophole for the devil. Anger left unhandled will lead to resentment. Resentment left unchecked will produce a bitter person." So we need to be aware that if we let our anger get going and we don't look at it, we're going to get ourselves in trouble, and we're going to get people around us hurt because they're having to take care and go around what we have kind of missed. Many of us know someone who is bitter and know what their bitterness has done and see how it harms them. It is most likely that there's someone in this room right now who may be harboring some undealt with anger. It may go a way back. Probably a lot of us, if we go back, it's something we've pushed back, but every once in a while the old devil will just remind us of something that's come up. There are three simple phrases that I want to share with you as we get into this. Look at tonight's outline on dealing with anger and resentment. They're easy to say, they're easy to remember, but I can tell you by firsthand, they're not easy to put into practice. The three steps are admit it, commit it, and forget it. So let's start with the first step in dealing with anger and resentment. And if we're going to deal with it, we've got to be honest enough and admit that we're dealing with anger. It's hard to do because many of us do not understand that anger itself is not a sin. In fact, that's why the Scripture admonishes us, be angry and sin not. We're told in the Bible there is a time we need to be angry. And right now there's a lot of things going on in our country that our people need to be rising up and say, I'm stinking mad. You know, we just got to do something about this. And those who deal in mental health professions acknowledge the value of anger. In fact, stuffed anger is the source of so much depression that some are going through because they have stuffed anger instead of expressing it and dealing with it. I've known people who prided themselves on never being angry, and some of them would have been much better off if they had let their anger kind of come out and dealt with it instead of just pushing it back. It needs to come to surface. Probably some of you right here and me, all of a sudden, they have some anger that we just need to deal with. Often the word anger we feel is directed toward ourselves. We tend to be harder on ourselves than anybody else. I don't know why, but so often in counseling over the years, I've had so much problem dealing with people who were dealing with self-anger. We spend a lot of time being unforgiving toward ourselves for mistakes and failures, and we turn a lot of hostility inward. We stuff it inside. We need to take a good look at ourselves, and we need to accept a responsibility, any responsibility that may be ours. In so doing, we may realize that we have inadvertently or overtly produced some of the anger. So just take it here. As you admit anger, focus on the cause. If you're dealing with some anger right now, just kind of allow for a moment to ask yourself, why am I dealing with this anger? What is going on with me? Why is it directed? The people who we're so often angry with, and most are some of our closest to those around about us. They're often recipient of our angers, and that we would have directed them, and they have no idea what's going on. Maybe anger toward our co-worker, our boss, someone in the family. One of these days, I will probably preach a sermon that I have been asked several times to repeat. I first preached it years ago. I don't know how many times I have preached it over the years, but I was in Emmanuel about 14 years, and about every 3 or 4 years, I began to get those that say, "Preacher, you got to preach that sermon." And I knew what they were talking about. The title of the sermon, "Has anyone kicked your cat lately?" It makes a pretty good sermon. We had a lot of good time. It's like, "Preacher, preach the cat sermon." Or preach, "Has anybody kicked your cat lately?" It's a syndrome where the boss chews you out. You go home and chew your wife out. Your wife chews the kids out, puts them outside, and the kids go out and kick the animal out there in the outside. Anger is so often directed toward family members. In many families, there are hurts that have remained undealt with for years. Over the years, I've done hundreds and hundreds of funerals. I've come to the place, I would give anything if I had been one of those pastors who kept records. I have done hundreds of funerals, especially when I was in a couple of places where I had funeral records. Carthage, we had 2 funerals there, homes there, and both the owners there were deacons in the church. And I did a lot for that old church, but I was on the radio every Sunday, and I did a lot of funerals. Get a call and say, "Pastor, I'm preacher, my mom or dad listen to you every Sunday. Would you do the funeral?" And I had the opportunity of reaching out to a lot of families. As you admit, as you or me, as we admit our anger, we need to, as we start dealing with it, we need to focus on the cause and the one to whom it has been directed. We need to stop and ask ourselves, why am I feeling the way I am? The people we are so often angry with, as I said, are often closest to us. And as I said, one of these days, maybe I'll get around and preach that, "Has anyone kicked your cat lately?" Anger is often, as I said, directed to family members. I did a funeral where part of the family sat in the family room, and the rest of the family sat in the auditorium. I mean, you could feel the tenseness about it. One was, as I said, they were stepped out. And I stood at the graveside where the tension was so strong there. And I wasn't sure in that particular family where the tension was so strong that you could feel it. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But one family member was a law enforcement officer, and he spoke very hard to the family members. And as I was standing there talking and he was being very hard, I saw him just drop his hand down on his service revolver. And I thought, "Oh Lord, I'm in the funeral home, but I don't want to take instant business right now." I've tried to reconcile families who couldn't even verbalize the reason. I've sat so many times dealing with them in the office or in their home and say, what exactly are you angry at each other about? And I've tried to reconcile them. I couldn't get a lot of them to verbalize what they were angry about. And I would suspect that right here in this room, there may be some who kind of living with some tension right now. And if I just took you aside and you came to me for counseling, which I did so much of, and I asked you to tell me, what exactly is this all about? I've heard hundreds, I think, of times say, you know, preacher, as we do, I don't really know, but it's just not right. I said, well, so what's just not right? And, well, you know, preacher, it's just not right. Yeah, I heard you, it's just not right. But what does just not right mean? So what has your spouse got to do to make it right? Oftentimes, I don't know. And I've tried to reconcile families that couldn't even verbalize what the problem was about. Some are second and third generations of angry families. I can tell you, that don't sound real, but it's absolute truth. Someone has well said there are two elements of long-standing anger, the mood and the brood. And some of you perhaps right now are in the mood stage. You're allowing something that's happened to just be inside of you, and you're just kind of dwelling and let it incubate inside of you. Others may be in the brooding stage. But wherever you are, the beginning of wherever you are, it's time for you to say, it's enough of it, not going to deal with it anymore. So we need to admit it, we need to commit it to God. And one of the things that I hope you learn from this series that I'm working on, by the way, I'm thoroughly enjoying working on these things. What I want you to get from this is that wherever there's a problem, folks, now get this, wherever there is a problem, you can be absolutely sure there is a solution to that problem from God. He has it for you. He has it in the Word. That's true of anger. If you have anger in your heart, you need to commit it to God. We must see it for what it is. We need to see it, admit it's sin. That's the hardest thing to get people to do in counseling, is say, it's sin. Well, they would say, well, you know, I've kind of got a problem with this. Don't tell me what it is. Well, you know, preacher, I've kind of lived with this. No, tell me the little three-letter word. I don't know. I don't know. Well, I said, well, just guess. And I would talk to them about the mooding and the brooding anger, that they would be unwilling to turn loose, and I guarantee you there's at least one or two that would be dealing with that, probably more. The psalmist says in 37:8, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Confess the sin of anger, he is saying to you, and then you can know the releasing. You can turn it loose. But until you confess it, until you admit it's there, you will never be able to turn it loose. A prominent psychologist said, until the anger and resentment is verbalized, it will never be taken care of. So let's go back to the scripture text for the Paul said, do not let the sunset find you still nursing your wrath. He said, don't let it keep on working in your life. Don't give it any place. When you have admitted anger, that's the first place. Admit there's anger in your heart. And then when you admit it, then commit it to God. He will direct you in one of two ways. Now listen to this. If you commit your anger to God in one of two ways, either He will direct you to some specific action in dealing with it, or He will direct you to a total acceptance of some way to deal with it. Did you get that? He will direct you to some specific action in dealing with it, or He will take you to a place where you can just take the situation and deal with it. He may just say to you, it's all right now, forget it. Nothing else needs to be done. He does that so often. Accept it the way it is, and He will enable you to do that. Don't run ahead of God. Many have done that. Many people have become aware of the angry spirit towards someone, and they've gone to that individual. They feel they have offended or been offended by it, only to find that they were talking to someone who absolutely didn't have any idea what they were talking about, had to deal with that. Preacher, I don't know what they were talking about. I don't have any problem with this. Don't go dealing with someone about your anger until God, folks, directs you to do that. In the invitation time years ago, a woman came from near the back down to the front, pushed past several people, and began talking to a woman. I kept the invitation open until she finally finished and returned to her seat. After the service, the lady to whom she had talked to was in tears. I mean, she was just bawling. The woman told her that she had been convicted during the sermon of anger that she had held toward her and wanted to settle it with her. She looked at me and with tears running down her cheeks, she said, "Pastor, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with that woman. I don't even know her name." She told me, she said, it was of no consequence. She had it all settled, but I'm devastated. I'm sure. I really didn't know much about that woman myself. She said, "What do you think it could be?" And I said, I really don't know. She hadn't been attending very long. I really don't know much about her. But I'm sure that woman meant well, but she could have settled it between her and God and left the woman out of it. Waited to see if she dealt with God, then wait and let God see if God needs you to do more, or that's all you need to do. It's likely, in that case, that God would have directed her to confront not to have directed her to confront the young lady and just leave her devastated. That isn't like God. God would have directed her to just leave it alone and go about it. I heard a story of a man who went to the doctor for a physical examination. The man was 69 years old, and after the exam, the doctor said to him, "You are in remarkable shape for your age. Tell me how you have stayed so physically fit." The man replied, "Well, when my wife and I married, we made agreement that at any time one of us was angry, I would take a walk and stay outside until anger cooled down." And he said, "You know, I have spent most of the 40 years out in the sun and the breeze, and it's apparently been really good for me." Well, we can laugh about that, but there's some truth to it too. That's one way to handle anger and resentment, but there's a better way. Admit it, commit it, and then, what would that word be? Forget it. After you've dealt with it, forget it. This may well be the most difficult of the three. In one sense, it's impossible for our brains, for they're a giant computer. Well, some are more gigantic than others, but our minds are really kind of a computer. They never truly forget anything. But just because it's ignored, that doesn't mean we have to access it and throw it up on the screen ever so often. When it comes down, folks, on its own, refuse to replay the scenes and experience the old hurts. Just don't pull up the old things. Don't brood over it. That hurts, and it destroys. God dealt with me about this a number of years ago. I think I could go back to the very spot on the street where, as plain as if he was standing right before me, I heard God say so plainly, "How long are you going to keep living with this? How many times are you going to retell the events of this experience?" I wish I could tell you truthfully and say I always remember and practice that lesson, but I don't. It's so easy, folks, for us to let hurts get into our mind, think about them, talk about them, and then hurt over them. If they just let them go, it's just as if they just happened. When we cut our finger and a scab begins to form, we know that the healing process begun, and we must allow the scab to remain there until it disappears on its own. If we pull the scab off every time it forms, we're going to prolong the healing. Some of us are experts at pulling, folks, the emotional scabs off in our life. I've heard people say, "Well, I'll forgive, but I won't forget." You ever heard that? I'll forgive, but I won't forget. Common word. That really translates to "I won't forgive" either. If you don't intend to forget, you'll intend to forgive. And some of you may be there right now. You've experienced that anger. Forgiving and forgetting are just a matter now of the will. You've been hurt by someone, resentment still lingers in your heart and in your mind. It may never heal, maybe. It will never be healed until you totally come to the place where you'll forgive the person whether they've asked for forgiveness or anything about it. An unforgiving spirit is hard for you to live with. And folks, many of you know it's not only hard for you to live, it's hard for you to live with them. Be aware that anger, listen to this, anger is just one letter short of danger. Anger, it's one short letter of danger. Sometimes anger, folks, requires action. Sometimes it requires acceptance. One of the reasons that I know that anger is not a necessary sin, because the scripture, folks, tells us that Jesus got angry in the temple. You remember that? Jesus was angry when the money changers were in the temple. They were defiling the house of God and became angry and took action. I said that in a sermon preached over the radio, and boy, I got a reprieve from a listener. And that letter burned in my hands. It told me in no uncertain terms that Jesus was never angry because he never sinned. That was my point. That's what Paul meant when he said, be angry and sin not. You can be angry and not sin. Have you ever heard someone say that's not anger, it's righteous indignation? That's kind of a way of saying, I'm not going to accept responsibility. There is such a thing, but righteous indignation does not produce hurt, nor does it continue to hang on, simmering and festering inside of us. You can tell the difference, folks, between the two. Most of the time, what is passed off as righteous indignation is nothing more than just simple anger. I like the story of the little boy who was misbehaving, and his mother had all she could stand. Placed in a timeout, he lay down on the floor and threw a temper tantrum. She banished him to the closet, where he continued to kick against the doors and the walls. The mother suddenly realized that she had not heard the doors and the walls. And so the mother suddenly went to the door, becoming concerned. She opened the door and asked, son, what are you doing? He replied, I spit on your shoes, I spit on your purse, I spit on your dress, and I'm sitting here waiting for more spit. Now, some of us in some ways have been there like that. The little boy was just a little more honest, I think, than we are sometimes. He was mad at his mother, and he took some action, the wrong action, but at least he didn't stuff it inside and allow it to fester. The starting place, folks, in dealing with anger and resentment is to admit that it exists. The next step is to accept our part in the situation. We often look around for something or someone to blame when we feel angry. At times, we have legitimate reasons to feel angry. However, there are many times, let's be honest, there are many times when you think you have a right to be angry, and if you're honest, you know there's no one to blame but yourself. Why? It's well been said, if things go wrong and you haven't spent sufficient time with the creator of the universe, don't waste a lot of time looking for an explanation. Listen, we cannot come to grips with our anger until we have determined where it comes from and toward what or whom it is directed. Anger toward ourselves and others is so difficult to deal with. But perhaps the most difficult anger to deal with is anger toward God. It may sound strange to speak of anger toward God, but there are many, many people who are bitter toward God because they blame Him for some hurt that they have experienced. There is a bitter memory in my mind. I was in the 3rd grade. My father was pastor of a church with a lovely name, Loco, Oklahoma. And we were living in the parsonage, and catty-cornered across from us was a beautiful home. And there was a mother there, living there, and a little girl who was my best friend. We played all the time together. We were both in the 3rd grade. But things went wrong. That memory is still so vividly in my mind. That goes back a long, long ways. But I can still hear her woman screaming out, God, I hate you for taking my brother. And she was down there just screaming, God, I hate you. I hate you, God. And that little daughter would stand out there and just be shaking, and Mama would scream at her, I hate you. God, I hate you for taking my brother. Now that young man was a very special young man. He and his wife were very active in the First Baptist Church here where my father was pastor. He was one that everybody in town could call on to do whatever they need to help him. But he had been killed in an oil field accident. He had gone out with the company, got out at the field, and he climbed up one of the poles, and somehow, they don't know how, but cleats turned loose and he fell, and it killed him. And her anger toward God made her so bitter toward the church and toward everybody. God understands, folks, our anger. He can take it when it's directed toward him, but we can't. It's hard to admit that we are angry toward God, but just like a child sometimes gets angry toward a parent, we sometimes get angry with the Heavenly Father like any good parent will do. God will forgive our anger. Get that? Just like you will forgive your child at the given time, God will forgive his child, and the right relationship, whatever it's been, will be restored. In handling the matter of being wrong and forgiving others, we need to remember that we have a God of forgiveness. We need to remember how often he forgives. There is no limit. Peter asked Jesus, Lord, how often should we forgive? Do we do it 7 times? I'm sure that Simon Peter thought he was being really generous by saying 7 times. But he wasn't ready for Jesus' reply. Jesus said 70 times 7. Don't believe that Jesus was simply saying, when you have forgiven 490 times, it's going to be all right. He was using a hyperbole, as often as asked, as often as needed. But what if we're not asked? Is it all right to stay angry? You know the answer to that. No, it's not. Practice living in a forgiving model. Forgiveness is not company policy, folks. Don't live that way. Practice the art of forgiveness. Make a decision right now. When we go out of here, you're going to go home this week and you're going to think about something that you need to forgive. Someone you need to forgive. And you're going to take some action to do that. Remember what Jesus taught in the model for prayer. Forgive us as we forgive others. Let me ask you, do you really want God to forgive you like you forgive everybody else? Don't live that way. Practice it. Probably not. I know you don't. I'm not a grudge holder, but I'm glad that God is more forgiving than I am. Tonight would be a good time for some of you to lay aside some anger and resentment. How do you do it? Follow this formula. Admit you're angry, commit the anger to God, and then ask God to help you forget it. Did you get that? Admit your anger, commit the anger, and then ask God to help you forget it. Determine that you're simply not going to live that way anymore. Some of you need to start by knowing that you have been forgiven. You're still carrying a lot of guilt. And if you took that to God, he'd say, I don't know anything about that. Why, yeah. No, it's gone. And he forgives. The Bible says he forgives and he forgets. So you need to start by having a relationship with God that's filled with forgiveness. And there's no better time than the present. Listen to Paul's words in Ephesians 31:32. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. Folks, tonight, claim those words. Make a decision to live by it. Tonight, band, if you'll start this way, you think about this as they're coming. Just think about right now asking God to help you to just be a forgiving person. And start, folks, with forgiving yourself. You can't be a good forgiver to others if you do not forgive yourself. It's so good to have all of you here. I hate up here like this, but I can't see your face. But you probably got, some of you probably got that. But it's good to see you. Bow your head with me and you ask God to help you be forgiving. Ask Him right now. Ask God to show you something in your life that you need to forgive yourself for. Ask Him if there's something that you need to ask Him to forgive Him for, yourself for, and ask Him to forgive you. And do it. Father, right now, tonight, we just give this time to you and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for knowing you're a forgiving God. Father, I just give this time to you. Thank you for these who are here. It's been kind of I've never preached this time where I couldn't see people's face, but I'm so grateful that they're here tonight. We've had a good time. So let's